We begin tonight in the United States, where the party convention season is reaching its conclusion. It is unrivaled as a political spectacle, a chance for the party faithful, Republicans last month and now the Democrats, to show their commitment to and faith in their chosen candidate in that long run-up to the November election. Political heavyweights from the Democratic Party have been endorsing Kamala Harris at their National Convention in Chicago. She formally accepts the nomination later tonight, the final day of the convention. Well, earlier, the former U.S. President Bill Clinton said come November, the choice was clear. Mr. Clinton's words were echoed by the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, and by the television icon Oprah Winfrey. And then we had Tim Walz accepting his party's nomination as vice presidential candidate. Arise international correspondent Faith Orr reports from Chicago.
Tim Walz is a man that many Americans weren't familiar with just a few short weeks ago. A former teacher, football coach, and the current governor of Minnesota. He's described as the type of person that politicians dream of being able to.
Well, apologies for that. The recording's obviously gone a bit wonky there, but let's go live to the person who put that report together, international correspondent Faith Orr. She's at the Democratic National Convention, and she's going to tell us how it's been playing out. We do apologize, Faith. It's not your fault. Obviously, you put together a good report there, and then it all went wonky here. But we saw at the beginning of your report Tim Walz accepting his party's nomination as vice presidential candidate. Tell us more about what his speech focused on. It was a big moment for him, wasn't it?
It was indeed. It was a huge moment for this man who, not that you heard it, but as I said in my report, until relatively recently was very, essentially unknown. I mean, he was a governor, he had been a congressman, but this is not a man that most Americans were very widely aware of. He's not a huge name in the Democratic Party. So this was a big moment. This was his introduction to America. He used it to play on his background as a teacher, as a football coach. In fact, some of his former players had actually spoken before him, very much playing up the fact that he comes from a small town. His walk-on music was that from Bruce Springsteen, and he also said that that town that he came from, there was only 400 people in it. So that was in Nebraska. So this is very much a Middle America antidote to Kamala Harris and her kind of coastal connections in California. She needs him to balance her out. Other than his background in education, he also told people about his time in the Army, in the National Guard. He spoke about being a congressman, about being the governor of Minnesota. And he also just spoke about being a good neighbour and how important that was to him. Very much a family-oriented thing for him, his family in the crowd, both of his children in tears at one point, with his son mouthing, "That's my dad."
And of course, beyond the speeches highlighting Kamala Harris's empathy with the American people, how she will think about, the people before herself. I mean, we're starting to hear from people like Bill Clinton highlighting what he says is the party's superior economic record, and Oprah Winfrey talking about freedom for women over abortion rights. I mean, how important are those messages, especially for the undecided voters in America?
Well, I actually stood in the convention centre last night and I listened to Bill Clinton's speech, and it really struck me just how much disdain he had for Trump. He was openly mocking him. He was saying, you know, oh, the man has endless references to the late, great Hannibal Lecter. He said that to him it was a very simple choice for Americans, either Kamala Harris for the people or the other guy who is all about me, myself and I. Clinton, under no illusions here, he does not believe that Trump is fit to hold the office of the president. As you mentioned, we also heard from Oprah Winfrey. She very much touched on abortion rights. The theme for last night was the freedom for Americans. So we heard about reproductive rights. We heard about the attack on the Capitol, the January 6th insurrection. We heard on a lot of these issues, particularly for the abortion rights. Oprah Winfrey really hammering home that she believes Harris is the only person that can protect Americans, not just when it comes to abortion, but general health care and other issues. We heard too from now a retired police sergeant who was at the Capitol on January the 6th, and he spoke about what happened there, and of course Donald Trump being a big proponent of what happened there, and his fear of what would happen to America if Trump was to get back into office.
And of course, away from the Democrats, I mean, we heard from Donald Trump, who addressed his supporters on the campaign trail. It was his first outdoor rally since surviving that assassination attempt last month. He spoke from behind a bulletproof glass at that event in North Carolina. What did he have to say?
Unsurprisingly, he used that speech to attack Kamala Harris. He also attacked Tim Walz, but he was trying very much to get the crowd behind him. He was supposed to be speaking about national security. As often happens with one of Donald Trump's speeches, he resorted to personal attacks. He described Nancy Pelosi as crazy. He described Barack Obama as nasty. And he actually outright said he was not going to stop with these personal attacks. I think people want him now to focus on some issues. He is continuing these personal attacks. He's also trying to sow doubts about November's election. He used the speech last night to do that, about how valid it's going to be. Because, of course, as we know, he still hasn't accepted the results of the 2020 election. He seems like he's not going to accept this one either if he loses. He spoke to Fox again this morning. That was when he attacked Tim Walz as being a lightweight. He criticised his speech last night, said he was just trying to be a favourite football coach and had no place in politics.
And there is some potentially good news for Mr. Trump, which obviously the Democrats will not be potty about. ABC News has been reporting that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could drop out of the presidential race by the end of the week and then endorse Donald Trump. Why might he be pulling out, and how much of a boon would that be for the former president?
This is probably one of the easiest questions you've ever asked me, Charles. It's very simple. He is pulling out because he knows he's never going to win. He doesn't have a chance. The way that the American politics works, a third candidate, certainly in 2024, is not going to win the office of the president. Why he is offering to endorse Donald Trump is because he wants a cabinet position. Trump says he would be very honoured by that endorsement, and he would consider giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a place in his administration. So that is, you know, it is a win for Donald Trump. I don't think the Democrats will actually be too bothered about it. I mean, Kennedy used to be a Democrat. He stepped away from that. No one is really talking about him here in Chicago. Even the protesters who are talking about voting for a third candidate, they're talking about Jill Stein. They're not talking about Robert F. Kennedy. I don't think this is a great loss for Harris.
And now that, of course, you've mentioned the protests, back at that Democratic convention, they're having to deal with a tricky issue. Protests about the Biden administration's Middle East policy and the fact that that Palestinian voices are not being, or have not so far been represented at that convention. I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's not just that they haven't so far, they will not be heard. Delegates who are in support of Palestine will not be platformed, they will not be given a speaking slot at this convention. By contrast, we did see the parents of some of the captives held by Hamas take to the stage, and they were given a speaking slot. So it's a tricky one for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to play here. They can't afford to lose the huge Jewish vote in America, of course, but there are thousands and thousands of protesters. They need to be careful not to lose those votes either. As you mentioned, there are protests outside. The past 2 nights have been a little bit quieter. Monday was the big one. We saw about 50 arrests at the Israeli embassy on Tuesday. Tonight, we do expect the protests to be big when Kamala Harris takes to the stage. Before her, we'll hear from Gretchen Whitmer, we'll hear from Elizabeth Warren. We'll also have a performance from Pink. Beyonce was believed to be performing, but we now understand that she won't be, and Pink will be taken to the stage instead. But outside, we do expect thousands and thousands of protesters to be voicing their anger against Harris.
And as you mentioned there, Faith, that party convention reaches its conclusion tonight with a speech from Kamala Harris. One expects a sort of rousing, address, a vision of America, and possibly lashing out at Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely. I would have no illusion that she's not going to lash out at Donald Trump. I mean, he has set the bar for that, so she has so far called him weird. She kind of mocks him, but we do expect her speech to be very rousing, to be very optimistic. Kamala Harris is going to lay out her vision for the future of America as the country's first female president. I think as it gets to the end of this convention, we have seen tens of millions of viewers tune in. I think Tuesday night when the Obamas spoke, 81 million people watched from around the country. So this convention has helped Harris gain a lot of momentum. She will be looking to use her speech tonight to ensure that she carries that momentum and it takes her to the White House in November.
Faith, thanks very much indeed. Faith Orr is Arise international correspondent. She was talking to me on the line there from Chicago.